Well, when they asked me today how long I was going to speak, I told them, well, I'd like to say a few things about New York, and they said, you have 5 minutes. And I reminded them I'm paying for this, so I get 10. But I am only going to speak for a short time today because we have some terrific speakers, and you've already seen, the public advocate and how deep people feel about this issue. But I'm going to talk about New York because right now, if you're not from New York, you need to know that you're in a city right now that is in a homeless crisis. It is in the newspapers every single day. It is out of control in certain ways. Tonight, there are 58,000 individuals, men, women, and children in city shelters, and there are another 100,000 that are doubled and tripled up and would be here if there were room. It is just maxed out. As you're going to be in the city for a day or two, you'll walk around, you will see homeless individuals everywhere. The mayor is doing sweeps up and down from downtown all the way up to 150th Street. It is in a real crisis situation. But I think what's important for this conference is how did it get there? Yesterday, the governor actually threatens that he will take over the shelter system. The state will commit if they have to. That's never happened before. And although we call this a crisis, if you sit back and think, it's 30 years, not a crisis. This is an institutional problem of a very, very severe poverty. So how did this happen in New York? And I think New York's a good, quick example, which I will do in a very short time, that can be used everywhere. What have the policies to reduce homelessness been? They've basically been three-pronged. First, whenever we talk about homelessness, we talk about housing. We need more housing. Sure we do. Will we ever get enough? Probably not. The last time there was a balance between low-income housing for low-income renters in this country was 1970. Today, the deficit is at 6 million. That's not going to happen overnight, and the federal government is basically hardly in the business anymore. So housing is one approach, but it has its limitations. It will serve a certain number of individuals across the country, but many more will be left out. The second is prevention. We always spend money on prevention. The mayor has recently banged that up to about $45 million in New York. And prevention is good, and anti-eviction programs we've instituted again here. Now, none of these things are new. As you go through 30 years, you see these same programs with different labels as they come and go. I've seen this before. Now, prevention is good. Who wouldn't spend money on preventing a family from becoming homeless? But the reality behind prevention, like the reality behind housing, is that it has its limitations. Preventing what? An eviction today, but there's a reason for an eviction. Will it happen tomorrow? And that's what happens with prevention. Yes, we will be successful with a certain number, but we will lose with a certain number, and more families will become homeless. The third and final policy area that's been used to reduce homelessness is housing vouchers and rental supports. Began with Section 8. Section 8, of course, is capped out. Waiting lists are enormous because as people came off the public assistance roll, they went on to the Section 8 roll to make up the difference in income streams. But in New York and elsewhere around the country, and with rapid rehousing and housing first approaches, the federal government has put money behind voucher systems that have certain limitations to them. Whenever we use a voucher system, we do two things. Number one, we invite many, many more families that are doubled and tripled up to come into the system to get in line and get a voucher. And that becomes a problem. As good as that may be, it's a problem because there's not enough vouchers to go around. Number two, when we give vouchers, and this is where New York really ran into a problem in the Bloomberg administration, which wedded itself to rapid rehousing solely in the last 6 or 7 years of the administration, gave out vouchers like candy, time-limited vouchers. The question then becomes, what happens when that time runs out? What happens when that voucher ends? New York City, 60% of those families have returned to shelter and are still returning. So with each one of these approaches, which we've been wedded to nationally and in this city, there are limitations of success and much more failure. So the question is, what is to be done? What are the answers? And the answer is a mixed bag. I think that for 30 years we've been approaching homelessness in the wrong way. We've been trying to make families fit into shelters, fit into policy systems that we've put in place when we should be making shelters fit families. What are their needs? The real question is, the answer to homelessness doesn't begin at the exit of the shelter door. It begins at the entrance. Why are you here? What has brought you to shelter? Why is this family here today? And people tell me sometimes, they say, well, there's no difference between these families and families that are housed. Well, you're wrong. They're housed, and they're not doing very well financially. And these families aren't, and there are problems. So with that, I'll put my Homes for the Homeless hat on and tell you what we've learned over 30 years, not only in New York, but what we see nationally when the Institute also looks at numbers. Basically, we've learned that you can put homeless families into 3 different groups. The first group is a group of people who have worked, who have tenancy, who for some reason or another lost their job, lost their home, paid a health bill, didn't pay rent, and they're homeless. Now, this is your rapid rehousing group. This is where you must realize, from a policy perspective, that one-size policies, which is what we followed nationally and in this city, are wrong. One size does not fit all. That first group, when they're in shelter, they should be out right away, back into a job, help them get a job, and away we go. You will now take pressure off the system. You will now have less homeless families. The second group we've learned is a needy group in a certain way. They're young mothers, usually 25 and lower, usually have 1 or 2 kids when they come to the facility. They have incomplete educations, and they have no work experience, and they need some parenting skills. Well, a visit to that shelter door defines a certain need, and that should be a certain opportunity to address those issues, and I'll come back to that. The third group are your chronic homeless. These are families that find themselves homeless over and over and over again, and that is because they have a slew of social problems that have to be dealt with. We have domestic violence. We have child welfare abuse cases. We have foster care cases. We have mental health cases. We have substance abuse cases, and the list goes on. To take a family like that and say, here's a voucher, away you go, here's a housing spot, is a waste of money and a waste of time. They will return, and they do. So if you look at homelessness and you look at those 3 categories, now you say, how do I make public policy out of this? I have the housing, it has problems with it. I have prevention, it has problems with it. And I have vouchers, and I have problems with that. So you have to take a step back and say, what is this all about? The housing isn't going to come, to meet the need. The prevention isn't going to solve everything, and the vouchers are going to be time-limited and probably won't go on forever and won't be enough for everybody. When you step back, you really say, what is a shelter? If the truth be told, shelters are really a surrogate for public housing. We don't build public housing like this anymore. It is a surrogate for it. They have become that. And if that's the case, then let's take that word shelter out of it, and let's make this an opportunity to deal with the 3 groups of homeless families that I've identified. And that can be done. We can have these short-term facilities for these families that have jobs, that have education, that have all the skills and just find themselves homeless, and move them right out, and you can do that quick. The second group, what an opportunity to take a young mother with some very young kids, to give her those parenting skills, to complete a GED in these facilities, to go on and get into some community college courses, to get job trained, job ready, and to make it mandatory. You're here, you are in public housing, which means we are funding it with public funds. Now let's do the public job and get you ready to live independently. The third group, we will have to take our system, and this is what the city of New York has to do and has to think about. Right now, we're in a 90-day window where the administration in this city is rethinking its entire shelter system. It has to, because it's in total chaos. It must be rethought. And this, to me, seems like a sensible blueprint. That third group really needs specialized services. So let's put them. Let's put the dollars where the people are. And let's make the shelters fit the needs of these families rather than these families fit the needs of these shelters and moving people out. I think if you do that, you buy yourself 4 things. Number 1, you reduce demand for people coming into a shelter system. Number 2, you reduce length of stay in the shelter system, which in New York City now is about 430 days, which has never been before. If number 3, you will reduce the recidivism, that return to shelter, that 60% of people who are coming back, that is money poorly spent, which leads to the 4th point, is that you will save money. You will do a better job from a public policy government point of view, and you will do a terrific job from a social policy point of view. Now, the important thing in all of this, the most important element of this, is what Letitia talked about. It's children. Homelessness in New York City is a children's issue. You may see people on the street. The majority of kids in these shelters, the majority of people are children. And your typical age of a kid in New York City in the shelter system, about 12 or 13 is your average age of a homeless person in this city. Now, that tells a story. Because if you don't deal with that issue today, remember, this is 30 years. We're a generation 2, 3 into this thing. You will deal with more generations. If you don't address the educational needs, 80,000 homeless kids in the school system today, another 80,000 that are too young, that are homeless, not in the system yet in New York. 1.3 million across the country, another 1.3 million that are under the age of 5, not yet in the system. This is a future of cost, of opportunity lost, of people that will not go on to work, but will go on to the juvenile justice system, the criminal justice system, teen pregnancy, foster care system, with enormous costs and enormous loss of human opportunity. So I talk to you today, the simple facts, simply to paint where New York is. And I think that New York is in a crisis is very good, because the fact that it can be under the rug and skim along for so long is really an injustice. Now we see the door is open, we understand the problems, we see them more pronounced, we try all kinds of approaches here, some work, some don't. Rapid rehousing is a good approach to rapidly move families who are ready to be rapidly moved back to the scarce houses that are available. Everything else is an educational curve. The answer to homelessness in this country is education. Educational opportunity for children, for young mothers. What an opportunity to take that second group, 25-year-old mothers with children. They're not lost, they're ready to go. Put them back into that system and make it work and get people job ready and job trained. Because the truth is, a voucher is a payment with a dream. There is no success at the end of that. And when people talk to me about vouchers and tell me, what a success, we've moved 30,000 families, I always say, look at the timeline. Look at the timeline, because if you don't prepare families to compete, if you don't prepare kids to compete and fulfill the American dream of a good education, a good job, a good family, and a good home, you're just going to have the kind of severe poverty that we've taken and we accept. It's 30 years we accept it, and it's still all around the country, and it's rampant. So I just wanted to point that out today, because I think New York is really at a point where you might see some change, where this city has to face that services must be given in shelters, which, again, I say that word is a fallacy. This is new public housing. Until something else changes, that's what it is. The public's paying for it. You might not like it, but that's what we open. We don't open enough housing in the other sense. So I leave you with that. I leave you with the thought that this is a children's issue. And I leave you with a point that Letitia made. You know, we're living in a gilded age, truly a gilded age. Where are we living? The 1870s, 80s, and 90s. Few have much, and many have little. But I've learned, and we see today, though, we see today the measurement of one's wealth. When you look and you hear Wall Street and you watch these shows on TV, the measurement of one's wealth is always what he or she puts into their pocket. But I've learned over 30 years that the real measurement of one's wealth is what he or she puts back into the community. That's right. So, that's right. So, you're a millionaire, you're a millionaire, you're a millionaire. This is a conference of millionaires, okay? So let's spend all our money well today. I got my extra minutes, tough, okay? And I hope to see you all at the conference. Thank you for coming.